On a quiet December night in 1984, 14-year-old Lisa Hession left a birthday party just minutes from her home in Manchester. She never made it back. Found brutally murdered in an alleyway less than 100 yards from her front door, Lisa's death sent shockwaves through the town and marked the beginning of one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in British history. But Lisa's murder wasn't the only attack. In the months before and after, other girls had been stalked, assaulted, and silenced. The signs were there, the pattern was forming, and yet the killer remains unknown. This is the story of Lisa Hession, a life stolen, a town haunted, and a case that still cries out for justice. Leigh, Greater Manchester, a working-class town where everyone knew everyone. In the early 1980s, the streets still echoed with the fading sounds of industrial labor, but for most of the town's children, life was relatively simple. It was a place where kids walked to school without fear, where neighbors nodded at each other from over their fences, and the days turned with a predictable rhythm. It was, by all accounts, a safe town. And in the middle of that ordinary northern life was Lisa Jane Hession. Lisa was the kind of girl who lit up a room without trying. Born on April 12, 1970, she lived with her mother Christine, a loving, hard-working woman, and her grandmother Eleanor, who helped raise her. Her father wasn't part of her life, but Lisa didn't seem to need more than the support of the two strong women who surrounded her. To her friends and family, Lisa was kind, confident, and funny. The kind of teenage girl who could switch between giggling with friends to helping someone in trouble without missing a beat. She was athletic, a proud member of the Leigh Harriers Athletics Club, and had a real gift for gymnastics and cross-country running. In photos, she's smiling broadly, her dark hair feathered in the classic 1980s style, her eyes full of energy. She wasn't just a girl who existed, she lived. At Bedford High School, Lisa was popular, well-liked by her teachers, and academically strong. But she was also just a normal teenager. She loved music, fashion, parties, and boys. Her walls were almost certainly covered in posters of the time: Duran Duran, Wham, Madonna. Her favorite song was The Power of Love by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which had just reached #1 in the UK charts. It would have been playing at every school disco and every party that winter, including the one Lisa would attend on the night she died. Lisa was not naive. She was known to be cautious and level-headed, especially when it came to strangers. She didn't take unnecessary risks, and she didn't scare easily. But she also didn't have much reason to feel afraid. Leigh wasn't a place where girls went missing. It wasn't a place where nightmares came true. In the final months of 1984, however, there was something darker creeping through the town. Something quiet, unsettling, and still largely unspoken. A series of sexual assaults had occurred in and around Leigh. Girls had been grabbed, followed, threatened. But the dots hadn't yet been connected, or if they had, it wasn't something widely spoken about, especially not to teenagers like Lisa. On Saturday, December 8, 1984, Lisa dressed for a friend's birthday party. She was excited, happy, and as she left her home that evening, she had no idea that this night would be the last time anyone would ever see her alive. She walked out into the cool winter air, full of the easy confidence of someone just steps away from adulthood. She was 14 years old, young, yes, but growing into a life full of promise. Her walk, her smile, her presence, all that energy, all that potential, it would be violently stolen before the night was over. What happened to Lisa Hession in the dark streets of Leigh would not only shatter a family, but haunt a town for decades to come. And even today, her killer has never been found. It was a cold Saturday night in Leigh, the kind of early December evening when most people stayed indoors, wrapped in the warmth of their homes. The streets were quiet, lit by scattered street lamps and the glow of distant Christmas decorations. For Lisa Hession, the night was simple. She was heading to a friend's birthday party just a short walk from her house. Lisa was in good spirits as she got ready. She dressed casually, skirt, a t-shirt, her white boots, and likely had her Walkman playing one of the latest chart hits. She was 14 years old, confident, reliable, and always respectful of her curfew. She told her mum, Christine, she wouldn't be long. Just a bit of fun with school friends, a familiar routine. At the party, Lisa was her usual self, bubbly, kind, and easy to be around. Friends remember her chatting and laughing. She spent time with her boyfriend and didn't stay late. She wasn't the type to push limits. At around 10:15 p.m., she left the house on Leigh Road, making her way back home, a journey she had taken many times before. The walk should have taken no more than 15 minutes. Lisa was last seen on St. Helens Road and later near Buck Street, where she turned into a short, narrow passage, a ginnel that cut behind Rugby Road. That shortcut would have brought her out just yards from her front door on Bonnywell Road. But Lisa never arrived home. Her mother grew concerned as the clock ticked past 10:30. By midnight, worry had become fear. Lisa wasn't the kind of girl to stay out without calling. Something felt wrong. Just around that time, a man and his young son were walking their dog near Rugby Road. As they passed the ginnel, the dog began acting strangely. The man turned his torch into the passage and froze. There, not far from the path, he found the body of a young girl. It was Lisa. The police arrived quickly and sealed off the area. What had been a quiet residential corner of Leigh suddenly became the center of a major investigation. Officers began working through the night, collecting evidence, taking photographs, speaking to neighbors. In the early hours of the morning, the unthinkable news reached Lisa's family. She had been found just steps from home, and something terrible had happened to her. By dawn on December 9th, Leigh was no longer the same town. News spread fast. A teenage girl, bright, loved, and full of life, had lost her life in circumstances that no one could understand. People were stunned. Parents held their children a little tighter. Neighbors looked out windows with unease. And in one home, a mother's world had shattered. Lisa had nearly made it. She was just 200 yards from safety, from her front door, from her family. Someone had taken that from her, quickly and without warning. And they had disappeared into the night. The ginnel behind Rugby Road was quiet again by morning, but it no longer felt like part of a familiar neighborhood shortcut. It had become something else, a place marked by fear, grief, and unanswered questions. By dawn on December 9th, 1984, the street was cordoned off with police tape. Uniformed officers stood guard while forensic teams worked in silence, collecting evidence under the faint orange glow of streetlights. The press hadn't arrived yet, but word of mouth spread quickly. Something terrible had happened to a local girl, and the details were only beginning to emerge. Lisa Hession's body had been found close to home, just off a footpath that many children in Leigh used daily. She was found lying near the edge of the ginnel, her clothing disturbed. Officers could see that she had been attacked. She hadn't fallen or gotten lost. This was deliberate. Someone had chosen that place at that moment. A forensic pathologist was brought in quickly. The early post-mortem results confirmed what investigators feared. Lisa had died from asphyxiation, and there were signs that she had been assaulted beforehand. The attacker had used her own clothing in the act. The crime had been sudden, violent, and deeply personal. But who could have done such a thing? Detectives believed Lisa had been followed. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, no defensive injuries that suggested a chase. Whoever attacked her likely waited until she was alone, possibly even knew the area well. They may have watched her, studied her routine. This wasn't random. It felt targeted. Within hours, the Greater Manchester Police launched one of their largest investigations in the region's history. They interviewed more than 500 people in the days that followed: friends, neighbors, partygoers, anyone who might have seen something that night. Officers went door to door throughout Leigh, asking residents if they'd seen a lone man or heard anything out of the ordinary. There were clues, but nothing concrete. A few residents recalled seeing a man in jogging gear hanging around near Buck Street in the weeks leading up to the murder. Others reported hearing strange noises that night, rustling, running footsteps, but couldn't be sure what they were. In the following weeks, detectives began to suspect Lisa's murder might be linked to other incidents. Over the past year, several young women and girls in Leigh had reported being followed or attacked by a man matching a similar description. Fit, in his 20s, dressed like a jogger. In each case, the attacker had fled before being caught. Now police were asking, had those earlier incidents been warnings? Lisa's murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message. Someone dangerous was out there, and he had escalated. The fear settled over Leigh like a fog. Parents no longer let their children walk to school alone. Girls were warned to stay in groups. The ginnel where Lisa had taken her final steps became a place no one wanted to walk through, day or night. And for Lisa's family, grief quickly turned into something else, a need for answers. Lisa Hession, devastated and heartbroken, begged the public to come forward. "If anyone saw anything, anything at all, please tell the police," she said in one of her first public appeals. "We just want to know who did this." The truth was out there. Someone had seen something. Someone, somewhere, knew the man who had taken Lisa's life. But despite the scale of the investigation, despite the town's collective sorrow, Lisa's killer had vanished into the dark. No one was arrested. No charges were brought. And as the weeks turned into months, the trail grew colder. Still, Leigh would never forget. Lisa Hession's name was now written into the town's history, not just as a victim, but as a reminder that even in a quiet, familiar place, darkness can find its way in. Leigh had always felt like a safe place. It wasn't perfect, no town ever is, but people knew each other. Neighbors watched out for one another. It was the kind of town where kids played out in the street until tea time, where doors were left unlocked, and everyone knew who belonged on their street and who didn't. But after December 8th, 1984, that sense of safety was shattered. News of Lisa Hession's death traveled fast, faster than even the police expected. By the following morning, the town was buzzing with confusion, fear, and disbelief. It was hard to imagine that something so brutal could happen to someone so young and so close to home. The local press quickly picked up the story. "Teen girl found dead in Leigh Alley," the headlines read. Within hours, reporters were knocking on doors, taking photographs near the cordon, and piecing together the last movements of a girl who, until the night before, had been just another smiling face in the school corridors. But Lisa was not just another girl. Not to her family, not to her friends, and not to her community. At Bedford High School, the mood was silent and heavy. Grief swept through the classrooms like a cold wind. Her teachers, struggling to hold themselves together, tried to offer comfort. Friends sat in groups, heads down, some crying, others simply unable to speak. One classmate later said, "We just kept waiting for her to walk through the door, as if it wasn't real." The school placed a memorial in Lisa's honor, a cherry tree, planted in the grounds with a small plaque bearing her name. It wasn't much, but it gave people somewhere to go, somewhere to remember her. Over the years, that tree would become a quiet symbol of remembrance, a way of saying, she mattered. For Lisa's mother, Christine, the loss was unbearable. She had raised Lisa alone with the help of her own mother, Eleanor. Lisa was everything to her. The house on Bonnywell Road, once filled with her daughter's laughter, now echoed with silence. The untouched bedroom, the unwashed clothes, the gifts under the tree that would never be opened. In interviews, Christine never asked for sympathy. She asked for answers. Again and again, she made public appeals, often flanked by police officers. Her voice cracked, but her message was steady. Somebody knows who did this. Someone saw something. The town responded with an outpouring of support. Floral tributes appeared near the ginnel. Candles were lit in windows. Strangers left cards for the family. People came forward with information, even if it seemed small. The community wanted justice, not just for Lisa, but for the feeling of safety that had been ripped away. Yet, behind that unity, fear took hold. Leigh had never seen anything like this before. Parents started driving their children to school. Joggers and dog walkers avoided alleyways. Teenage girls stayed home when before they might have gone to the cinema or hung out in the park. Everyone looked over their shoulder just a little more than usual. The idea that the killer might be someone local, someone walking those same streets, shopping in the same stores, made it worse. Was it a stranger, a neighbor, someone the town had trusted? Weeks passed, then months. And while police continued their investigation, a grim silence began to settle over Leigh. No arrests, no new leads, no one stepping forward. Lisa's photo remained in shop windows. Her name stayed in the papers. But gradually the story slipped from the headlines, replaced by the next tragedy, the next news cycle. But not for Leigh, and never for her family. Lisa Hession wasn't just another statistic. She was a daughter, a granddaughter, a friend, a classmate. She was a teenager with dreams and energy and a whole life ahead of her, taken in an instant. And Leigh, once an ordinary northern town, would never be the same again. From the moment Lisa Hession's body was found, Greater Manchester Police knew this case couldn't be treated like any other. A 14-year-old girl attacked just yards from her own home in a quiet town with no warning. It was a crime that shocked even seasoned detectives. The investigation began with urgency and scale. Officers were pulled from surrounding districts. The ginnel behind Rugby Road was examined inch by inch. Evidence bags were filled with soil samples, fibers, and anything else that might hold a clue. Lisa's clothing and belongings were taken for forensic examination, though forensic science in 1984 was still limited. DNA profiling as we know it today hadn't yet been developed. Police began by tracing Lisa's movements from the party to the ginnel. Witnesses placed her on St. Helens Road and later on Buck Street, turning toward the shortcut behind Rugby Road. The route was familiar, well lit in parts, and not somewhere she would have feared, but someone had either followed her or had already been waiting. Detectives moved quickly to speak to everyone at the party. Friends, her boyfriend, the host's parents, neighbors, shopkeepers, bus drivers, people out walking that night. Every detail mattered. Had anyone seen a strange car parked nearby, a man lingering, a sound in the dark, a flicker of movement? A few tips came in. Some recalled seeing a man in sportswear, jogging gear, hanging around the area in previous weeks. Others mentioned earlier incidents in Leigh. Teenage girls followed. One even grabbed. In most cases, the man ran off before being caught. Police began to piece these together. Was there a pattern? Within days, a composite sketch was drawn up based on descriptions from previous victims. An athletic man in his 20s or 30s, slim, often seen wearing running clothes. He had approached girls, sometimes threatened them, and seemed to know when they were alone. Police believe this person may have escalated from attempted assaults to murder. A profile emerged, opportunistic, methodical, possibly local. Someone who knew the ginnels and side streets. Someone who could disappear quickly, without panic. The case dominated local headlines. Posters went up across Leigh. Crime Watch covered Lisa's murder, appealing to the public for information. Reward money was offered. Police received hundreds of calls, dozens of statements, and still, no breakthrough. There was one serious development. A suspect was arrested. He matched the profile and had a known history of violence. He was questioned, but no charges were brought. Whatever evidence the police had, it wasn't enough. The man was released. And though police never named him publicly, he would remain in the background of the case for years. He died in 2005, never having faced trial, and no DNA sample was confirmed to have been taken from him before his death. As weeks turned to months, the investigation slowed but never stopped. Detectives worked long hours, returning to the scene repeatedly, comparing notes, tracking down old leads. Lisa's family cooperated with everything. Her mother, Christine, answered painful questions, hoping for any scrap of information that might lead to an arrest. But each day that passed without answers felt heavier. Hope gave way to exhaustion. Behind the scenes, though, police were beginning to understand something chilling. Lisa's murder might not have been the first attempt. Leigh had been under silent threat for months. Women and girls had come forward describing near misses. Footsteps behind them, hands reaching from nowhere, a figure vanishing before anyone could help. Lisa, it seemed, had simply been the first one he didn't let go. The hunt had begun with fire and urgency. But as 1985 arrived, it became clear they were chasing a shadow, a man with no name, no face, and no conscience. Long before Lisa Hession's final walk home, Leigh had already been hiding a secret, one that, at the time, few people were connecting out loud. There had been whispers, nervous conversations among schoolgirls, warnings passed from mother to daughter. Don't take the shortcuts, stay in the light, don't walk home alone. But nobody wanted to believe something serious was happening. Until Lisa. In the months leading up to her murder, at least 3 other girls had reported being approached or attacked by a man they described as fit, agile, and wearing sports clothes. He often struck in the early evening on quiet streets or ginnels, much like the one where Lisa was found. In some cases, he had simply followed his victims. In others, he had grabbed them from behind. The assaults all took place within a mile radius of where Lisa would later be found. And crucially, all of the girls had been alone at the time. In one of the more chilling incidents, a girl told police that she had been dragged off the path by a man who tried to pin her down. She managed to scream, and the attacker fled into the night. Police searched the area, but the man had vanished, as if he knew every exit. At the time, these were treated as isolated incidents. But after Lisa's murder, they no longer felt random. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Greater Manchester Police began reviewing each of those cases, placing pins on a map, tracking the locations, times, and victim profiles. What emerged was unsettling, a pattern of fear that had slowly been tightening around the town. Lisa, tragically, was the escalation point. The theory was this: the same man had been testing boundaries, stalking, waiting, trying, and failing to commit a more serious offense, until the night of December 8th when he finally succeeded. Detectives believed the killer likely knew the ginnel where Lisa was found. It wasn't an obvious place, narrow, dark, and tucked between rows of houses, not somewhere a stranger would stumble upon. This suggested the attacker was local, someone who lived in or near Leigh and had possibly watched Lisa's route before striking. But if he was from the area, that presented an even more disturbing thought. Had people been walking past him every day? Had he returned to the scene, unnoticed, blending in with neighbors, watching the investigation unfold? One line of inquiry even suggested he might have known Lisa, not closely, but perhaps through school, sport, or family. It was a theory based less on evidence and more on gut instinct. The attack felt too deliberate, too precise, to be entirely opportunistic. In response, police re-interviewed known offenders in the area. They visited schools, spoke to coaches, canvassed gyms and athletic clubs, even looking into military bases nearby for anyone matching the suspect's build and background. They received hundreds of names. They worked through them all. Still, nothing. Even the composite sketch released to the public, drawn from previous victims' descriptions, brought no positive identifications. Calls came in. Tips were followed. But the man, if he was even still in Leigh, had vanished. For women and girls in the town, everyday life became laced with anxiety. They changed routines, avoided side streets, and constantly looked over their shoulders. What once felt like a safe place now seemed to hold secrets in every shadow. Lisa's story didn't just haunt Leigh because of how it ended. It haunted Leigh because deep down, some feared it could have happened to anyone. The pattern was there. The signs had been there. But nobody saw the full picture. Not until it was too late. For all the hours Greater Manchester Police poured into the investigation, all the witness statements, street patrols, and late-night tip-offs, one man stood out early, the only serious suspect ever arrested in connection with Lisa Hession's murder. His name has never been made public. He was described as a local man, someone with a known history of violence toward women. He had lived in or near Leigh at the time of Lisa's death and matched the general profile: athletic, mid-20s to early 30s, solitary. He had once been questioned in a separate sexual assault case not far from the scene. The police brought him in quietly, no public statements, no media frenzy. Behind closed doors, they asked him the hard questions. His story didn't quite add up. He had no strong alibi. But crucially, they had no hard evidence either. At the time, DNA profiling was still in its infancy. Forensics could only go so far. Fiber analysis, blood typing, and other tools of the era could point to a person, but not definitively. Without a confession or a clear match to the scene, the police were left with uncertainty. So after hours of interrogation, the man was released without charge. He moved on with his life. Or perhaps vanished more carefully. Years later, rumors circulated around Leigh. People whispered his name in pubs and kitchens. Some swore he had left the country. Others claimed he'd stayed close, blending back into normal life. A few even believed he had confided in someone. If that was true, no one ever came forward. Then, in 2005, came the news that changed everything. He had died. The details were vague. No public announcement, no follow-up by police and the press. But to those still following Lisa's case, it was a gut punch. If he had been the killer, then justice might have died with him. If he wasn't, then the real murderer was still out there and the trail was colder than ever. But there was a deeper problem. No one could confirm whether police had ever taken a DNA sample from him before his death. By the early 2000s, a partial DNA profile had been developed from Lisa's clothing. It wasn't enough to upload to a national database for an automatic match, but it could be used to compare directly to a named suspect, if that person was alive to give a sample. But if this man had died before police collected DNA, or worse, if no one thought to check, then that comparison may never happen. Lisa's family were devastated by the news. Her mother, Christine, had spent 2 decades hoping for a resolution. She had stayed strong in front of cameras, stayed patient with investigators, but hearing that the one man she believed could hold the truth had died, untested, felt like the case slipping away forever. Still, police never fully ruled him out. Privately, some officers still believed he was responsible. Others weren't convinced. The case remained officially open, undetermined, but few leads followed in the years after his death. Public appeals continued. Police still encouraged anyone with information to come forward. But the man, the only suspect ever arrested, had left behind no confession, no evidence, and no closure. Just questions. Had they let a killer walk free, or had they spent years chasing the wrong man? The shadow he left behind still lingers in Leigh. And for Lisa's loved ones, the mystery of what he knew, or what he might have done, remains a wound that time alone cannot heal. Years passed. What began as a furious investigation slowly transformed into a cold case, not through apathy, but through absence. Absence of evidence, absence of witnesses, absence of answers. Lisa Hession's name remained on police files. Her face stayed on the walls of the Leigh police station. But to the public, especially to those who didn't live through 1984, she became a name in an archive, a case left behind by time, gathering dust while new tragedies claimed attention. But to her family and friends, Lisa never faded. She was not just a victim. She was a daughter, a schoolgirl, a bright spark in a small town. She had dreams. She was kind, funny, athletic. Her favorite things were swimming and spending time with her mom. She had just started going to parties. She had her first boyfriend. Her life was beginning. Christine Hession never gave up. She was the constant voice in the dark. When the newspapers stopped reporting, she kept speaking. When others forgot, she reminded them. She never moved house, refusing to leave the town where her daughter had lived and died, believing she'd one day see justice. Every year she visited the Ginell where Lisa's body was found, quietly, alone, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with just her thoughts. It was the place where her child's future was stolen, but it was also the last place Lisa had been alive. There was a strange connection to it, not comfort, but truth. In 2011, on what would have been Lisa's 40th birthday, Christine gave a rare public statement. She should have had a family of her own by now. She should be here. Someone out there knows something. They always have. The case continued to haunt the town of Leigh. For those who were teenagers in 1984, Lisa's story shaped their adolescence. For the girls who were followed but escaped, survivor's guilt lingered. And for the detectives who worked the case, Lisa was the one that got away, not from justice, but from protection. Even in the absence of evidence, Lisa's presence remained strong. Locals created memorial pages, shared photos and memories online, and continued to call for justice. In a small town like Leigh, people remember. They remember Lisa's laugh, her ponytail, the way she always helped younger students at school. They remember how a single night in December changed everything. For the Hession family, the heartbreak of Lisa's murder never dulled, but neither did their resolve. They never let her become just a headline, and despite the silence, despite the waiting, they still believed in answers. Lisa's story may be unsolved, but it was never forgotten. By the early 2000s, science had evolved far beyond what was available in 1984. DNA technology had gone from primitive blood typing to microscopic precision, able to extract genetic material from a single hair, a trace of skin, or the inside of a garment. Cold cases across the UK were being reopened, long-forgotten files dusted off in evidence rooms, and convictions were being made on crimes once thought unsolvable. Lisa Hession's case was one of them. The breakthrough came not from new evidence, but from re-examining what had been stored all along. Her clothing, preserved since the night of her murder, was subjected to advanced forensic testing. From it, investigators developed what they described as a partial DNA profile. It wasn't a complete strand, but it was enough to exclude suspects and, more importantly, to match a known donor, if that person had their DNA on record. Greater Manchester Police launched a renewed public appeal. They revisited their list of over 500 names previously collected during the original investigation and began the slow process of contacting surviving individuals for DNA samples. They urged the public, if you were in Leigh in 1984 or know someone who was, and have any doubt about what they were doing that night, come forward. They also began cross-referencing the partial profile against the UK National DNA Database, but no automatic match appeared. It meant one of two things. Lisa's killer had never been arrested for another crime, and therefore not swabbed. Or the killer was dead and had died without leaving a DNA sample behind. Either way, the frustration returned. The DNA gave new direction, but not the resolution Lisa's family needed. Still, police pressed on. They explored familial DNA, the science of comparing a partial profile to relatives of possible suspects, looking for close matches. This had worked in other major cases, even leading to arrests years after the crime. But even that avenue seemed to end in silence. Despite the setbacks, Lisa's case remained active, not just in name, but in genuine effort. A small cold case team continued to work it. Officers who had long since retired still revisited it privately. Former Detective Superintendent Tony Brett, who led the original investigation, publicly called the murder the most haunting case of his entire career. Each time a DNA technology advanced, hopes were raised again. What if all it took was one more breakthrough? One more trace? One more profile uploaded to the database? And the match appears? As of today, Lisa's killer remains unidentified, but investigators say the DNA holds the key. It may be partial, but it's real. It's preserved, and it belongs to someone. It's not a question of if Lisa Hession's case can be solved. It's a matter of when, and whether the person responsible is still alive to face what they've been running from for 4 decades. Time changes towns. The streets age, shops close, children grow up. But some stories never fade. They echo between the bricks, in the shadows of alleyways, in the quiet spaces people avoid speaking about too loudly. In Leigh, Lisa Hession's name still lingers, not just on plaques or memorial pages, but in everyday conversation, in whispers, in wary glances, in what people don't say as much as what they do. There's a shared memory, especially among those who were teenagers in 1984. They remember the shock, the disbelief, and above all, the fear that followed her death. Parents who had always felt safe in Leigh suddenly began walking their daughters to parties. Doors were double locked, boys were warned, girls were watched. People began seeing things, or thought they did. Men in dark coats, strangers at bus stops, neighbors who looked just a bit too long at schoolgirls. The town began to watch itself. Then came the rumors. Over the years, a handful of names circulated, men who left town shortly after the murder. Men who were odd or reclusive or angry. One in particular was whispered about often. A local man, tall, strong, never quite right. Some believed he was questioned. Others said he confessed to someone after a few drinks, but no charges were ever brought. He too died years ago. Whether police ever took his DNA is still a question no one will answer publicly. People who lived near the ginnel where Lisa was found still avoid walking through it after dark. Children growing up in Leigh were told not just to stay safe, but to remember Lisa. She became a kind of ghost story, not to frighten, but to teach, not to sensationalize, but to honor. Some feel angry that the killer was never caught. Others feel ashamed that someone in their town may have kept a secret for decades. Leigh is not a large city. It's a place where everyone knows someone. If Lisa's killer was local, it means there's a strong chance someone knew or suspected and said nothing. There's still hope, of course, but there's also exhaustion, the kind that comes from decades of waiting. In 2014, on the 30th anniversary of Lisa's death, a candlelight vigil was held in her memory. Dozens of people came, some who had known her, some who hadn't even been born when she died. And in that silence, in the flickering of flames, one thing became clear. Lisa had not been forgotten. Not by her family, not by her friends, and not by a town still haunted by the question, who killed Lisa Hession? And why has no one, in all these years, come forward? It was less than 10 minutes. That's all it should have taken for Lisa to walk home from the party that night. 10 minutes of quiet streets, familiar turns, a routine stroll she'd likely done countless times before. Leigh was small, safe. Her house was just ahead. She was almost home. It's the kind of detail that haunts people most, that she wasn't far, that the streetlights were on, that someone could have seen her if they'd just looked out a window, that if someone had left the party a few minutes earlier or later, they might have interrupted something or prevented it altogether. Witnesses remembered Lisa's smile as she said goodbye at the party. The boys she'd walked with remembered her turning the corner at Holden Road. Her stride was confident, not rushed. She didn't seem afraid, but someone was watching her. The theory is that her attacker followed her for a short while, perhaps waiting until she reached a darkened stretch near the Ginnel between Rugby Road and Tudor Avenue. It wasn't completely hidden, but it was enough. Enough for a predator who'd planned, who knew the area, who moved fast. There was no scream reported, just the chilling silence of what followed, a silence that lasted until the next morning. Lisa had no chance. The attack was brutal but swift. Police believe she may have only had seconds to realize what was happening, seconds to fight, seconds to understand, and then it was over. The walk that was meant to take her home became the last steps she ever took. Her shoes lay scattered in the Ginnel. Her keys were never found. Her path stopped there, but the ripples of what happened didn't. Every year since, people have retraced those final steps. Reporters, detectives, true crime followers, even strangers, they visit Rugby Road. They walk through the Ginnel. They try to see what Lisa saw. To understand what she didn't know would be her final moment. But the truth is, we can't understand. We weren't there. We weren't the one being followed. We didn't feel the fear when it was already too late. All we can do is remember that walk, because it belongs not to her killer, not to the town, but to Lisa. It was her path, her story, her final minutes, and even now, 40 years later, they still cry out for justice. Lisa Hession never got to grow up. She didn't get her GCSE results. She didn't go to college. She never traveled the world or had the chance to fall in love or build a life beyond those quiet suburban streets of Leigh. Her story was stolen, violently, cruelly, without reason. And yet, all these years later, Lisa's voice still echoes, not because she can speak, but because others have refused to let her be forgotten. Her mother, Christine, carried the grief like a stone in her chest until her passing. She made sure Lisa's photo stayed in the public eye, her case never far from conversation. It was Christine who insisted on dignity, who reminded the press not to sensationalize, who called Lisa kind, loving, and full of life. It was Christine who, in the face of unimaginable loss, kept her daughter's memory human, not just a name in a case file. Detectives, even those long since retired, have said that Lisa's murder is the one that still keeps them up at night. They speak of it not as a failed case, but as a wound left open. Every new technology, every DNA breakthrough brings hope and frustration in equal measure. The Ginnel has become a symbol, not of violence, but of why we don't give up. Local children walk past it on their way to school. Some know what happened there. Others just sense the weight in the air. And each year, candles still burn for Lisa. Her classmates, now in their 50s, still talk about her with the tenderness of childhood. Online, her case remains active in forums, true crime communities, and among digital sleuths, each trying to find that one overlooked detail, the missing link that might finally bring peace. And through all of it, one truth rises above the rest. Lisa mattered. She was not just a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a classmate, a teenager who loved gymnastics, who was excited about the Christmas holidays, who never expected her life to end in violence. And so this story ends not with answers, but with a promise that we will remember her, that we will speak her name, that we will keep asking the question, who killed Lisa Hession, and why are they still free? Someone, somewhere, knows.